The air over Winterfell was cold and creaking, and Ned Stark stood on the battlements, staring into the grey horizon. The wind carried whispers, of ice, of death, of something older than the wall itself. He'd heard rumours from the Rangers. Beyond the frozen shore, the dead were stirring again. His heart pounded. The north was bleeding. His people would be slaughtered. He could not stand by. He remembered the stories from Maester Luwin, the legends of the Pact struck in ancient days, when men and others once wove a fragile peace. That pact, buried in time, said that the old powers would retreat in exchange for a vow, that the children of the north would guard the line, that the realm of the living would leave beyond the wall untouched. But the pact had been broken, forgotten, and now the dead marched. Ned swallowed. He would make a choice no Stark had dared to whisper. He would seek the Night King not to fight but to bargain. If he could forge a solemn oath, forged in blood and ice, he might save Winterfell, the north, his children. He would risk all. He rode north of the wall, past crumbled towers and frozen forests. The further he went, the heavier the silence became. His men shivered, weapons trembling, faces white as snow. When they reached the shattered remains of an old ice hall, Ned dismounted. He left his guards behind. He walked inward into the dim shadows, breathing mist. In the heart of the hall, the Night King waited. Blue eyes like shards of winter regarded him. Ned's voice was steady. "I come with a proposal." He laid down his sword. He offered his blood, Stark blood. He promised the wall would hold, that the north would give tribute, lives, resources, vigilance. He would bind his house to guard the frontier, keep the wildlings in check, make sure no living soul crossed without cause. In return, the Night King would spare the north from the march of the dead, keep his army north of that broken ice. Silence stretched. The Night King's icy aura pressed in. When the wind howled, it felt as though the others whispered. At last the Night King extended a hand, not to strike. He accepted the blood, the oath. His lips did not move, but the air trembled. The dead would stay beyond the wall. The north would live, but such bargains always demand a price. When Ned returned to Winterfell, he carried the weight of secrets. He told his daughters only what was necessary. The north was safe for now. But he could not tell the others. The small council noticed his absence, his unreadable glance. His children saw the lines deepen on his face. Robb asked one night, "Father, what did you see beyond the wall?" And Ned answered, "I saw what we must protect." In King's Landing, whispers spread. Cersei, plotting her own wars, wondered how the north remained untouched while nobles fell elsewhere. The Lannisters thought it strange that every winter the dead never crossed as far as Winterfell. Little did they know the Stark had bartered with ice itself. Years passed. The wall held stronger than ever. The dead raged on but never crossed. The north grew prosperous, spared from the skirmishes that ravaged the south. But with peace came suspicion. In Winterfell's halls shadows moved. The old gods stirred. The pact weighed heavily on Ned's soul. Could he truly trust the Night King? Was any promise safe when death itself was the other party? One cold evening word came. A wildling party tried to cross illegally. They were slaughtered, not by living men, but by blue-eyed whites beyond the wall who guarded the borders. The people whispered, "The dead patrol now." Fear followed. Was the Night King watching too closely? Was the north caught in a cage of ice? Ned confided to Jon, his bastard son. In the godswood under moonlight, he said quietly, "I did what I had to do." Jon's eyes burned. "You made a pact with a monster." Ned placed a hand on his shoulder. "Better a monster bound than a monster free." Jon turned away, torn. Then the moment arrived. The wall's magic faltered. The dead surged. The pact cracked. The Night King came south, violating the boundary he agreed to. The North's defenders fell surprised. In Winterfell's courtyard, Ned faced the Night King's vanguard. He remembered his oath, his promise, his fear. He raised his sword, even though blood bound him. The Night King paused. The sky pulsed. In that moment, Ned realized a pact with death never lasts. The North would have to fight anyway. He charged. Ice met steel. His children watched from windows. The dead pressed in. He fought for his house, his legacy, every barren stone of his land. Every barren stone of his land. The fires burned low in Winterfell as the snowstorm howled beyond the walls. Ned Stark sat alone in the great hall, hands trembling slightly as he held a goblet of wine he hadn't touched. Around him silence reigned. His armor was stained with dried blood, his cloak heavy with frost. The battle was over, for now. But the truth clung to him like the bitter northern wind. He had made a pact with death, and death had broken it. He had hoped, perhaps foolishly, that the Night King would honor their agreement longer. But the storm beyond the wall had grown too powerful, the hunger of the dead too great. The thin line between peace and horror had shattered. Ned had bought the North time, years even, but it had always been a borrowed peace. Now that peace was over, Robb stood by the doorway, tall and angry, his eyes darker than they had ever been. He had fought beside his father, sword red with white blood, his men screaming in terror. He had seen the dead rise faster than they could fall. "We gave him what he wanted," Robb said quietly. "Your blood, our word, the wall, and still he came." Ned didn't answer at first. The flames cracked softly. "The Night King is not a man, Robb. He is not bound by the honor we know. He is a storm wrapped in flesh. Then why make the deal?" Robb asked, voice rising. "Why not prepare to fight all along?" "Because we were not ready," Ned said, rising. "We would have all died then, every man, woman, and child from here to the neck. You were 15. Arya was learning to shoot a bow. The North was weak. I did what I had to do." Robb turned away, disgust curling his lip. "So you gave our future to him. You made Winterfell a pawn of death." In the shadows beyond the hall, Jon listened. He had stood by his father's side during the first battle, cutting down wights with Longclaw, his heart pounding with each near miss. He had felt the wrongness in the air, the cold that pierced even dragon glass, and now hearing the truth from Ned's own lips, something inside him shifted. Rage mixed with sorrow. The honor he had believed in was compromised. The people of the North whispered already that the Stark gods had abandoned them, that the Pact had cursed their land. Some believed the Night King only spared Winterfell during the last march because of Ned's oath. Others believed he had only retreated to let fear fester longer. Either way, their lord's reputation cracked under the weight of choices made in the dark. Sansa, now grown and sharper than her mother ever was, confronted her father days later. "They call us kin of the dead now," she said, standing beside the Maester's table. "Do you know what that does to your daughters? What they say about our house in White Harbor? In the Riverlands?" Ned's face was lined and cold. "I don't care what they say." "You should," she snapped. "Winterfell cannot survive on silence and snow. If they believe we serve the Night King, they will never follow us." "I made that pact to save lives, Sansa." "You made it alone," she whispered, "and it will cost us everything." The storm returned faster than expected. Scouts vanished beyond the woods. Raven messages froze mid-flight. And one morning, as Jon rode along the ridges with Ghost at his side, he found something that chilled him to his bones. A northern village, once full of life, now turned into a circle of ice. Everybody posed upright, staring south. In the center, a sigil made from blood and bone. The Stark direwolf pierced with icicles. Jon returned to Winterfell with fire in his chest. "He's taunting us," he said. "The Night King is telling us he knows. He remembers the Pact. And now he mocks it." Ned stood in the war room, staring down at the map of the North. "Then it is time," he said quietly, "to prepare for the final betrayal." No one spoke. They sent ravens to the Vale, to the Riverlands, even to the Reach. Most went unanswered. The South still believed the dead were myths. And in King's Landing, Cersei laughed at the tales. "Let the dead come," she said. "They'll freeze before they cross the Blackwater." But in the North the chill crept closer. Arya returned from Braavos, changed and unreadable. She had heard of the breach and came back under nightfall, her face unreadable, her words sparse. "You should have killed him when you had the chance," she told Ned after her return. "No one bargains with death?" Ned looked at her for a long moment. "And what do we do now?" Arya's voice was soft, cold. "Now we kill him." The Stark family, once fractured, now stood together in the snow. Robb hardened and fierce, Jon brooding and wounded, Sansa sharp and calculating, Arya a ghost in her own skin, Bran touched by something deeper, something that stared past the world and into whatever came before. They all knew that the Pact had failed, that the Night King had waited, watched and learned, and now he was coming. One night the skies lit with unnatural light. Green, blue and violet flames shimmered across the heavens. The old gods whispered louder. The dead marched again, but this time not to conquer. This time to reclaim. Jon met his father by the Godswood the morning the dead crossed the last river. You should have told us everything, Jon said. I wanted to protect you. You did, Jon said. And now you've damned us all. They stood in silence. Ghost growled low. The weirwood tree swayed as if breathing, and then Ned Stark made his final decision. If I made this pact, he said, then I'll be the one to end it. No one stopped him when he rode out. No one dared to follow. They watched from Winterfell's walls as the Lord of Winterfell vanished into the snow once more. And beyond the wall, something waited. Something ancient, something betrayed. Ned Stark had made a deal with death. Now death had come to collect. The wind bit into his flesh like knives as Ned Stark pushed deeper into the frozen lands beyond the wall. Each step of his horse crunched over ice-covered bones. The silence around him broken only by the groaning creak of ancient trees. He wore no sigil, no house colors, no crown. Just old furs, wolf-hide gloves, and the blade of his forefathers at his side. He had come not as a lord, not as a warden of the north, but as a man who once dared to make peace with the dead. He found the frozen lake again, the one where he had stood, years ago, and pledged his oath to the Night King. Its surface was now cracked, jagged like shattered glass, black veins pulsing beneath it. There were no words spoken then. No language of man or monster, only understanding, but that understanding had collapsed, and Ned was here for retribution or redemption. As he stepped forward, the air thickened. The world itself seemed to hold its breath. The trees grew still. The snow stopped falling. Then, like a shadow emerging from a nightmare, the Night King appeared. He walked alone. No army, no generals, no death behind him yet. His skin shimmered with ice. His eyes lit like twin frozen stars. His gaze met Ned's across the lake, and the silence between them burned louder than any roar. Ned did not reach for his sword. You broke the pact, he said, his voice hoarse. You gave me your word. The Night King said nothing, but the wind screamed behind him, rising, howling. Then slowly he raised a single hand and pointed south, toward Winterfell. It was not a declaration. It was a sentence, and Ned understood. The pact had never been about peace. It had been about delay, time, preparation. The Night King had used the Stark blood, the tribute, the quiet border to study the living, to evolve, to wait. And now he was ready. Ned dropped to one knee, not in surrender but in resolve. He drew his blade, kissed the steel and whispered, "Then come for me first." Behind him the ice cracked. Whites rose from the snow, silent, soulless, obedient, dozens, then hundreds, then more. The dead encircled the lake as the Night King advanced. But he did not strike. He watched, observed, and then he turned and vanished into the mist. The whites followed, not toward Ned, south toward Winterfell, toward his children. Ned staggered, breath ripped from his lungs, the snow pulling at his feet. He mounted his horse and turned back, riding harder than ever before, his fingers frozen to the reins, his eyes wild. He had failed. The deal he made, meant to buy time for his children to live, had instead given the enemy everything it needed to destroy them. Back in Winterfell, Jon stood in the war room, maps scattered and voices raised. "They're moving too fast," said Robb, teeth clenched. "We can't outrun them, we can't outlast them." Sansa scanned the reports. "Last Hearth is gone. Carhold too. They're not taking prisoners. They're not turning everyone. Some they burn. Some they leave." Arya leaned against the wall, blades hidden, gaze unreadable. "They're sending a message." Bran finally spoke, his voice strange and distant. "He's not here for conquest. He's here for Ned." The room fell silent. Jon looked to Bran. "What do you mean?" "He made the pact," Bran said softly, "and he carries its mark. As long as he lives, the Night King's war remains unfinished." Sansa whispered, "He's the loose end." They stared at each other, understanding all at once what it meant, and then the gates thundered open. Ned collapsed into the courtyard, half frozen, eyes haunted. His words came broken, gasped. "He's coming." Robb pulled him inside, shouting for warmth, blankets, anything. But Jon knew. He knew from the way Ned looked at him, like a man who had tried to protect a fire and now watched it burn. They gave him water. Sansa sat beside him, pale. Arya didn't speak. "I made a deal," Ned rasped, "to save the North, but I didn't see the truth." He wasn't waiting. He was watching, learning. "I gave him silence, and he built an army behind it." Jon leaned forward. "Why didn't he kill you now?" Because he wants the pact ended in blood, Ned said. And he wants my blood to do it. The next day, the Night King's army arrived just outside Winterfell. They did not attack. They stood, waiting. Silent rows of the dead stretched across the snowfield, unmoving. The cold that came with them crept into stone. Fires died faster. The wind stopped. The Night King stood in the front, alone, eyes on the battlements. He was not there for war. Not yet. He was there for one man. Inside, Jon argued. Let me face him. If he wants blood, he can take mine. He doesn't want yours, Ned said. Robb slammed his fist on the table. So what, we hand you over? Let him take you like tribute? Ned looked up weary. I think that's always been the price. Arya's voice was cold. And what if it isn't enough? Ned met her gaze. Then let me die buying you time. As I did once before, Bran spoke again quietly. The pact must be broken properly, not just in death, in meaning. You must not give yourself willingly. He must be denied, Ned blinked. Then what? And Bran answered, not with certainty but with cold instinct. You have to betray the pact you made. Break it before he does. They didn't know what that meant, not yet. But they would. Because that night the dead began to move again, but this time they didn't march on the gates. They simply surrounded Winterfell, and they waited. The second night came with no sleep. Fires burned around the walls of Winterfell, casting flickering light over the stone as shadows danced like ghosts. The dead still hadn't attacked. They watched, unmoving, encircling the stronghold like a noose drawn tight but not yet pulled. It was a siege without a word, a silent declaration that the Night King no longer needed to rush. He was certain of fear, certain of surrender. Inside the castle it felt like a funeral. The people knew now. The whispers had become screams behind closed doors. The dead wait for our lord, they said. He made a pact with the darkness. Now it comes to claim him. Ned Stark walked the halls like a man already gone. Servants would not meet his eyes. Even the direwolves avoided him. Only Ghost kept close, his white fur darkened by blood and smoke. The Stark children, no, they weren't children anymore, watched him with something between sorrow and fury. He had done it to save them. And now they had to choose whether to let him go. Robb called a council. The Great Hall was nearly empty. Only the remaining Northern Lords and the Stark family remained. The weight of winter was inside the walls now, not just the cold, but the feeling of something ancient, inevitable. He won't attack, Robb said. Not until Father is dead. Arya leaned forward, her fingers brushing the hilt of a blade she'd hidden beneath her sleeve. Then we kill him first. Even if we could reach him, Sansa said sharply, do you think he'd fall to steel? Fire barely slows him. Dragonglass only works on his minions. We have to do something, Jon growled. We can't just wait for him to rip our gates down. Bran was quiet, his gaze far away. He's not waiting for Father's surrender, he said. He's waiting for Father's loyalty. Everyone turned to him. What does that mean? Robb asked. Bran's eyes blinked slowly as if seeing through time itself. The pact wasn't a lie. It was real. A bond between the blood of the first men and the force that came before them. The Night King doesn't want revenge. He wants continuation. He wants Father to kneel again this time. Forever. Ned shook his head. I will never. You already did once, Arya snapped. You did it alone. You gambled with all of us, the silence cracked. The air shifted. Ned took a step back, his jaw tight. He wanted to defend himself. To explain. To remind them that the dead had been coming fast and cruel back then. That if he hadn't acted, Winterfell would have been a grave. But in their eyes he saw it. They already knew. And still it didn't feel right to them. I thought I could outsmart him, Ned finally said. I thought if I gave him what he wanted, I could control it. But the thing I didn't see is that death waits. It doesn't rush, it just surrounds. Bran's voice broke through again. He wants to turn you. Everyone froze. No, Sansa said. No, that can't be it. He wants a Stark, Bran said, calm, distant. Not just any Stark. The one who gave him legitimacy. The one who crossed the wall willingly. The one who brokered peace. If he takes Father, he doesn't need to destroy the North. He'll become part of it. Jon's voice dropped. A Stark leading the dead. Ned looked down at his hands. Arya's voice was sharp. Then we don't let him take you. Not alive. Sansa turned to her. Are you suggesting we kill our own father? No, Arya said. I'm saying we burn him before the Night King can touch him. Jon slammed his hand on the table. "We're not going to kill him." "There has to be another way." "There is," Bran said, "but it requires breaking the pact. Not just with words, not just in blood. Father must defy what he promised. Publicly, he must desecrate it. Betray it, offend it," Robb frowned. "How do we offend death?" Bran turned slowly to Ned. "By doing the one thing you swore never to do. Reveal it. Let the world know. Tell every man and woman in the realm that you bowed to the Night King, that you brought him into our world with an oath. Break the secrecy. Break the pride. Break the legacy." Sansa's breath caught. "So you want us to shame him?" "No," Bran said. "He must shame himself." Ned stared at them all, stunned. The idea of confessing, of telling the world he had made a deal with the Great Other, was a nightmare. Worse than death. Worse than execution. His honor had always been the blade he walked, and now they asked him to shatter it completely. "But if I do that," he said, his voice cracking, "I'll go down in history as a traitor, a fool, a coward who made peace with death." "Yes," Bran said. "That's the point. The Night King made you into a symbol. You must destroy that symbol." The next morning, ravens flew from Winterfell in every direction, carrying one message, signed with Ned Stark's seal and written in his own hand. "Eddard Stark, Lord of Winterfell, Warden of the North, forged a pact with the Night King. I made peace with the dead. I swore allegiance to the enemy of the living to save my people. I was wrong. I have broken that pact. Let all the realm know it. I welcome judgment. But let death know this. I am no longer his." When the message reached White Harbor, Old Town Dawn, and even King's Landing, chaos bloomed. The realm was stunned. Some called it a hoax. Others called it a confession of madness. But in the north it was clear. The Night King had heard it. That night the dead howled, and for the first time they retreated, just a few steps, enough to show they had heard the betrayal but not enough to leave. The pact had been broken. Now the war would begin. Now the war would begin. The retreat lasted only until dawn. When the sun touched the horizon, a low, guttural sound echoed across the snowscape, a noise like ancient trees splintering under ice, like a scream buried beneath centuries of frost. It wasn't the sound of retreat. It was the sound of fury. In the distance, the dead stirred. Not chaotically, deliberately. Lines of them shifted into strange patterns. Symbols older than written language began to form in the snow, carved not by hands, but by the deliberate positioning of bodies. From the highest tower of Winterfell, Bran saw it first. His eyes, no longer fully his own, widened with horror. "They're not leaving," he whispered. "They're preparing a ritual." Jon stood beside him. "A ritual?" Bran nodded slowly. The Night King never wanted revenge. He wanted replacement. He wanted a legacy. Now that Father has denied him, broken the pact publicly, he'll take something far worse. Arya stood in the doorway, arms folded, face pale. "What does he want now?" Bran turned toward her, his voice almost a whisper. "He wants to burn Winterfell to the ground and rebuild it in ice. He wants to erase House Stark from the world, not just in blood, but in memory. He wants our home." By midday, the sky had turned from pale gray to an unnatural shade of blue, deep, sharp, unnatural. The temperature plummeted. Fires became harder to keep lit. The godswood began to freeze, its ancient weirwood tree crackling under the cold, and then they saw it. A massive structure, forged from living wights and dragged by monstrous undead giants, emerged on the horizon. Say a battering ram, not of wood or iron, but of bones. It bore a carving, a direwolf, shattered into pieces. Inside the war room, the council had fallen silent. Jon's jaw was tight. "We fight." Sansa looked at the map. "We don't have enough men." "We don't need enough," Arya said. "We need to be smarter." Robb's eyes burned. "We hold the walls, the gates, the inner keep. If they breach the outer walls, we fall back. Room by room, we make them pay." Ned listened without speaking. It was his silence that drew their attention. He stood, arms folded, his eyes sunken with sleeplessness. But his voice was steady when he finally spoke. "We cannot win by fighting alone." Jon turned. "We broke the pact. There's no more negotiating." "I don't mean with the Night King," Ned said. "I mean with the South." Everyone blinked. Robb frowned. "I want to ask King's Landing for help. The same people who called for your execution. Who mock your name now?" Ned shook his head. "Not ask, demand." He turned to Sansa. "You'll write the Raven. Sansa looked confused. To who? To Daenerys Stormborn. The room erupted. She's across the sea, Arya said. She doesn't care about the North. She cares about her throne. Ned nodded slowly. Then give her what she wants. Promise her the crown. Say the North will support her claim if she helps us burn the dead to ash. Jon stared at his father. That's treason. Ned looked him in the eyes. So is everything I've done. The time for pride is over. We survive, or we're all dust. The Raven flew that evening, riding fast winds and carrying the full desperation of the North. 3 days later, just as the ram began battering Winterfell's gates, the dragons came. 2 shapes tore through the frozen clouds, screaming fire and fury. Drogon and Rhaegal, their wings wide as ships, rained flame down on the whites. The blast turned snow to steam, shattered ice warriors into shards. The Night King turned slowly toward the sky, unbothered, unblinking. Daenerys Targaryen arrived with fire in her heart and vengeance in her blood. Behind her rode the Unsullied, the Dothraki, warriors hardened not for cold but for conquest. She landed Drogon outside the broken walls, her silver hair whipping in the wind. Jon met her at the gate. She looked at him for a long moment, then said, "Tell me why I shouldn't burn your whole house to the ground." Jon didn't flinch. "Because the dead want that more than you do." She raised an eyebrow. "And if I kill you now, you'll be ruling an empty world." It wasn't a threat. It was a fact. Dany looked past him at the horrors clawing at Winterfell's gates, and for the first time she saw not conquest, but extinction. Ned Stark walked forward slowly. He removed his sword, laid it on the ground. "I broke the world," he said. "Help me fix it." She looked at him. "So you made a pact with the Night King." "I made a mistake." She studied him, then finally gave a small nod. "Then we burned the mistake together." The battle that followed was not a victory, it was survival. Dragons lit the skies with fury. The walls fell. The outer yard became a grave. Robb fought like a man possessed, soaked in blood, cutting through the dead beside Grey Wind. Arya vanished into the shadows, striking from the dark. Sansa directed the evacuation from the crypts. Jon and Daenerys fought from above, barely holding back the waves of the dead. And in the center of it all, Ned Stark, sword in hand, stood in front of the Godswood. The Night King approached him. Alone, no words, no rage, just intent. Ned raised his sword, but before steel met frost, Bran's voice rang out loud and terrible. "Now!" From the towers above, the Maesters released the wildfire. Dozens of barrels, stolen from old Targaryen caches, rained down on the Night King and the dead around him. The explosion shook the earth. The flame was green, unnatural, pure. It lit the sky. The silence afterward was endless. Then, snow began to fall again, but the Night King still stood, burned, scarred, but alive, and his gaze found Ned Stark. Then, impossibly, he turned and vanished into the storm. The dead followed, gone, retreating north once again. Winterfell was saved, but not safe. Because death doesn't lose, it waits. It waits. The sky remained thick with ash and snow for days. Winterfell stood barely. Its towers were cracked, walls scorched, the courtyards painted in streaks of blackened blood and frozen flesh. The smell of wildfire lingered in the stone, in the air, in every breath taken by the living. The silence that followed the Night King's retreat wasn't relief. It was dread. He had come, faced them at their strongest, and left. Not defeated, not weakened, just watching. And that silence, for Ned Stark, was the loudest thing he had ever heard. He stood over the melted remains of the Godswood, where the great weirwood tree had burned in the firestorm meant to kill the Night King. Its bark, once white and ancient, was now blackened and split. The red leaves had curled into ash. What had once been sacred was now destroyed. Arya stood beside him, blades at her hips, but she said nothing. For hours, neither of them moved. Finally, Ned broke the silence. "He didn't take Winterfell because he wants us to rot in fear. He wants me to live long enough to watch everything fall." Arya's eyes were cold. "Then we don't wait for him to finish it. We hunt him." He turned to her, his face drawn. "You can't track death." Arya raised her chin. "I've done it before." Elsewhere in the castle, Robb buried the dead. Hundreds, brothers, friends, men who had followed him into battle and never come out. Some had turned, some had died twice. He held a burning torch in one hand, and Ghost stood beside him, growling softly at the pyres. Sansa took stock of the survivors. The northern bannermen were shattered. The Riverlands were silent. The Vale sent no word. They were alone again. Daenerys remained, though her army was fractured and thinned by the cold. Rhaegal had taken damage. Drogon was bleeding from the flank. She found Dany at the high tower, looking down over the battlefield. "You came to take the throne," Sansa said. "What will you rule if he wins?" Daenerys didn't look at her. "Ash and bones, just like my family before me." "Then you need to decide," Sansa said. "Are you a queen or are you our ally?" Dany turned slowly. "I am what the world needs me to be." Below them, Jon stood in the crypts, facing the statues of the Starks who had come before. Lyanna, Rickard, Brandon. Even the effigy of Ned's own face had been carved and placed there, after the South declared him a traitor and beheaded him. Now he stood before his own ghost. He didn't feel like a hero. He didn't feel like a prince or a commander. He felt like a man who'd been lied to all his life. And now, standing in the ruins of his home, watching the world break again, he felt something else. Anger. He turned as Bran wheeled into the crypt, his face pale and unreadable. "You knew," Jon said. Bran didn't deny it. "I saw the path. Why didn't you stop him?" "I'm not here to stop the past," Bran said. "I'm here to witness the future." Jon walked closer. "What is the Night King waiting for?" Bran looked toward the statue of Lyanna Stark. "He's waiting for the right moment." "He always has." Jon clenched his jaw. "Then we find him before he chooses it." "You won't," Bran said. "Because he's already moved." 3 nights later, ravens from the wall came, tattered, half-burned, scratched as if they had flown through fire. Eastwatch was gone. The dead had circled back, avoiding Winterfell, sweeping across the eastern shoreline. They weren't just killing now, they were harvesting, collecting corpses from ancient barrows, dragging away wildlings, turning crannogmen. And worse, they were digging. "What is he looking for?" Robb demanded, as the map of the north lay burned and torn before them. Bran's voice came like frost. "Not what, who. The Night King wasn't hunting cities. He wasn't chasing power. He was looking for something buried, something deeper than Winterfell, older than the wall, something left behind by the first men, and he was close to finding it." Jon stood beside Daenerys that night at the ramparts. "You came here thinking you'd fight Lannisters," Jon said. "Now you're at war with something worse." Dany nodded. "This isn't conquest. This is extinction." They looked out at the quiet snowfields, beyond which the dead now gathered in new places. Mute, calculated, changing tactics. Jon whispered, "He's not just marching anymore. He's evolving." And Dany said nothing, because in her heart she feared he was becoming something no flame could burn. That night, Ned dreamed, he was back in the north before the wall was built. Back when the world was young, and the first men bled into the ground to hold the darkness back. He saw a circle of stones bleeding, a tree with no face, a boy with blue eyes screaming without a voice. And above them all, himself bound in ice, crowned in frost, a king of the north, turned king of death. He woke in a cold sweat, his lungs frozen, his chest aching, and he knew the Night King wasn't after Winterfell. He wasn't after Ned's blood. He was after his heir, Jon. That same night, Arya found Jon on the battlements. "You're leaving," she said quietly. Jon didn't lie. "Yes." "You're going after him alone?" "No," Arya smiled faintly. "Good," because behind her Gendry stood, sword on his back. "Davos packed supplies," and Grey Worm watched from the shadows, unblinking. "Dany had sent her best." "You'll die," Arya said. "Maybe," Jon replied, "but I'll do it knowing I wasn't waiting to burn." Ned stood in the courtyard as they mounted. He didn't try to stop them. "You were always meant for more," he said to Jon. "I'm just trying to survive," Jon said. "No," Ned said. "You're trying to save us all. That's what makes you a Stark." Jon looked at him one last time. "I hope you're wrong." And then he rode into the snow, the storm closing behind him. The snow, the storm closing behind him.